as I always tell my students, this case is not just important. Not just important. And boy, for this class, it just is the foundation for everything we're going to do all semester long. But this case is not just a big case, not just an important case, not just a great case. I believe that this case is the greatest, most important case ever decided by any court in the history of the world, okay? So this is not just big, this is the all-time biggest case by not just the Supreme Court, but by any judicial body, any traditional kind of judicial body, any court in the history of planet Earth, okay? Big enough for you?
Yes.
Yes, okay, I hope so, all right. And I make that argument, and it's not just hyperbole, in my opinion. It is because there's never been a court in the world, in any country, this powerful or what's going to become this powerful as the United States Supreme Court. And the reason the Supreme Court is the most powerful court on the planet is because of this decision. Therefore, anybody who wants to study the Supreme Court, wants to understand constitutional law, needs to understand this case as well as you possibly can, because everything springs forth from this case. Every other case this semester is connected, is in one way or another connected to Marbury versus Madison. So as you're about to see, I'm going to teach this to you with a lot of detail, because I think it's so worthy of that detail, that you will understand this better than anybody you know, okay? And I hope you do understand this better than anybody you know. If I haven't made this big enough yet, I'll tell you my weird story. And you also, it's a good thing because you'll know how weird I am right off the bat here, so you know what you're getting into this semester. As you can tell, I already think this is big. It's even bigger than already than I've indicated, I think, to show you mentally how important this is to me. When I was an undergraduate, and I used to oftentimes study. My roommate was always making noise, playing loud music, and I couldn't study in my room, and the library seemed actually too noisy. I actually used to go to classrooms like this at night at the university I was going to, because at night there was almost no night classes, and I'd come into a room just like this one, and there's no class going on, and it was just like my room, my space. It was like a tomb, and I would come and study in a room like this at night. And every once in a while, when I wanted to take a break, I would walk up to the board, pretending I was a teacher, a professor, and I would write on the board, Marbury versus Madison, dreaming of the day that someday I would teach Marbury versus Madison to a room full of students, okay? So in my fantasy world, I teach Marbury versus Madison. So welcome to my fantasy world, and how much I like this. So pay attention, take fantastic notes, and my guess is you'll be the best expert you know on this case of anyone you've ever met, okay? All right, so this case, as I indicated, we have to look at these famous founding fathers. We have to look at this election of 1800 in a moment. And you really need to understand the background, the context, to truly appreciate this decision. And when you look at this decision, again, these people up on the board, these famous founding fathers, what a lot of Americans don't understand, and it's important, again, for this, to understand this context, is a lot of Americans just lump the founding fathers together in one big pot. Oh, the founding fathers, the writers, the authors of the Constitution, and they all thank goodness for them. They fought this revolution against Britain, wrote the Constitution, did all these great things, and they're just like they often speak as if they're one mindset, one way of thinking. Well, obviously, if you really think about it, that doesn't even make sense. You put, if you grab 100 people in Congress today, they don't all think alike, okay? And these people didn't all think alike. And so what people often ignore, because they often talk about the founding fathers with one voice, is how much founding fathers often viewed the world differently, disagreed with each other, had very different views. I mean, basically, they all were against England, wanted to break free, but then once you broke free, what kind of government you wanted? Tremendous disagreements. And among the people who strongly disagreed with each other were John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They viewed the world very, very differently. Very, very differently. They saw almost every topic in polar opposite sort of terms, all right? And these two men literally spent their lifetimes debating and disagreeing with each other, all right? And their relationship was so intense that I just always love to add this little story to this, which is shocking. And the probabilities against this is so remarkable. But these two men who were bitter political rivals, bitter political enemies for so many years, they both die on the same day. Okay? Two former presidents both die on the exact same day. And they don't just die on any day. They die on the 4th of July. Okay? So two presidents die on the 4th of July. And it's not even just any 4th of July. It's the 50th anniversary of the 4th of July. Okay? So 4th of July, 50th anniversary, two presidents. And of course, who is most closely famous and connected to the 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence? Jefferson, who is the primary author of the Declaration of Independence that we're celebrating the 4th of July, dies on the 4th of July. Okay? Now, why I'm telling you all this is to get back to the intensity of the story here, is when they both die, that Adams and Jefferson are dying on the 4th of July, John Adams' final words in this life, his final words as he's leaving this life he says, "Oh, Jefferson survives." So as Adams is dying, he's not thinking about his wife, Abigail. He's not thinking about children, the farm. He's thinking about Thomas Jefferson as he dies, okay? So that should give you a very good idea how intense this relationship was, okay? Until the very last moment of their lives, they're thinking, talking about each other. And incidentally, just a little side note of history, as he cries out, as Jefferson survives, he doesn't realize Jefferson actually does not survive. Jefferson's been dead for hours. He doesn't even know it yet, because there's no internet back then, right? So he doesn't know that in Virginia, Jefferson has already passed away the same day, but he cries out, "Jefferson survives." And whatever, you decide what that means. Some people say, "Oh, it shows his great respect." And other people say it means he's so mad that Jefferson is living. I have to die, and this guy gets to keep living. My arch rival gets to keep living. But who, only he knew for sure, okay, knows for sure. All right, so why were they such rivals? Well, again, they viewed the world differently. And then let's get back to the story in many ways here. Our starting point of the story is, not only did these two men disagree with each other, they ran against each other for the presidency. They ran against each other for the presidency the first time in 1796. In 1796. And again, just to put this a little bit in context, if you cared all about the history, is 1796 is the first presidential election without George Washington. George Washington has been the only president of the United States. For 8 years, he's been the president of the United States, and he sets the precedent, which I think is a great one, not to, he could have become a king. He could have kept going probably, because he was so popular. He says, "I don't want a king in America. I'm not going to run a third time." Okay? So he just chooses not to run the third time. So when he steps aside, there's actually an opening for who could become the second president of the United States, or a different president. And John Adams runs against Thomas Jefferson. Okay? And the winner of the election of 1796 is, who's our second president of the United States?
John Adams.
John Adams. John Adams defeats Thomas Jefferson. Okay? So in 1796, these two men run against each other, and the winner is John Adams. Okay? Now, already, obviously, that would cause a rivalry between the two. But it's going to get even more intense. And the reason it becomes more intense is this. When Adams defeats Jefferson and becomes the second president of the United States, who becomes John Adams' vice president? Who becomes his vice president?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson becomes his vice president. You might say, what? I don't get that. Why in the world would he become why would Adams, they're running for the presidency, Adams wins. How can the opponent become the vice president? He's running for the presidency. Well, the quick answer is because under the original Constitution, they made no provision for running for the vice presidency. What the original Constitution says is people are going to run for the presidency. Whoever finishes first for the presidency becomes the president. Whoever comes in second place for the presidency becomes the vice president. Okay? So if that was still true today, Hillary Clinton would be the vice president of Donald Trump. Okay? Does that sound like a good system? Sounds insane, right? Well, it not only sounds insane today, it was insane back then. Okay, the founding fathers really blew it. Okay, they did not, how smart they were. They were really smart, but they made some really dumb decisions too. This was one of their dumb decisions. Okay, because you had the political opponents connected as a president and vice president. So Thomas Jefferson had to endure the embarrassment of he lost the election, and then he has to serve under him. Okay, he has to serve as his vice president. So, as you might expect, that was a miserable relationship, and it was even more miserable than you might have guessed. It was so miserable, so terrible, that they, not only did they not want to work together, they actually publicly feuded. So in the newspapers at the time, talking to people, Adams and Jefferson would call each other names and insult each other publicly, okay? So for 4 years, they are feuding and fighting, and the vice president is, the president would say, well, he will propose an idea, the vice president said, terrible idea. The president's on his mind, like, that's wrong, what a terrible idea. So they actually, like, within, the White House, president and vice president are disagreeing on all these topics, and publicly disagreeing and insulting each other, okay? So, Adams is the president, is a vice president who's not loyal in any way, and they're at war with each other publicly. And then during these years, this is going on for 4 years, of course. During these years, the Federalist Party proposes a number of things that, in fact, make the Federalist Party unpopular. Okay? This party was the majority party in the United States. It not only won the White House in 1796, it was the party that dominated the House of Representatives, the Senate, and they would propose these things, and their popularity began to go down. And just to give you a quick, this is really quick and dirty here, and it's historically, there should be 100 examples I should give you here, but to give you a sense of the differences between these two parties, in general sense, the Federalists were a more elitist party. They were a little snobbier. They were like the big city party, more snobby kind of party, and trusted people with education and money and wealth. And this party was much more the common man, okay, the common person party, more agrarian, country. In fact, of course, with this party, it has this funny name in today's world, the Democratic Republicans, right? It has the name of both our big political parties, right? Which party is this today? Most people argue it's the Democrats. Over time, though, it's funny, at the time, this party, Democratic Republicans, a lot of people just called them the Republicans, a lot of people called them the Jeffersonians, a lot of people call them the Jeffersonian Republicans. But over time, this gets dropped off, and most people would argue that this is today's Democratic Party, okay? So this party, by today's standards, it's not that democratic or not that diverse, but compared to the Federalists, it was a far more open-minded, like liberal kind of party, and Jefferson cared about farmers and the common man, and Adams not so much, okay? So that was part of what was at root between the two parties. And in fact, along the way, I'll give you the best example probably of those 4 years. The best example of where they disagreed, and it kind of shows this difference of opinion, of elitism. During these 4 years, this party and the Congress, John Adams's party, they passed a law called the Alien and Sedition Acts, okay? And the Alien and Sedition Acts, you don't need to be an expert on this, but the point I want to make about it is this. It included, part of that law was you were not allowed to criticize the government. It was illegal to criticize the government. You could not criticize the president. You could go to jail for saying the president's doing a bad job, okay? So, today's world, every late night comic or every they'd all be like lifetime prison sentences, okay? So if you made a joke about Donald Trump, you could go to jail in today's world if you update this, okay? And in fact, a number of newspaper editors went to jail because they criticized John Adams. They criticized his policies, okay? And their mindset was, how dare you? How dare average people, writers or journalists, how dare they tell the president of the United States he's wrong? That's not good for America. I'm in charge. There's a reason I was chosen. The people should respect me. And so they passed a law that said you can't criticize us, with one exception. They left out the vice president. So you were still allowed to criticize the vice president if you wanted, but you couldn't criticize the president of the United States, okay? So if you want to attack Jefferson, but don't you say anything bad about me, okay? So when this law gets passed, and other laws, a lot of people say, these guys have gone too far. They're out of control. They think they're too big for their britches. And so 4 years pass, and their popularity is dropping, okay? 1800. So 4 years pass, John Adams runs for re-election. Who runs against him? Mike Pence, his vice president, right? His vice president runs against him, okay? So it is it's Adams president against his own vice president 4 years later. What happens 4 years later? Who wins? Jefferson. Now, when I say that, again, I think to me this is utterly fascinating, so I'm going to tell you more than you need to know. Time to go on the tangent here a moment again. Jefferson is going to beat Adams, okay? He is going to become the third president of the United States. But utterly fascinating, back to our early part of our country, because of those 4 years, how miserable they were, all these people in government start saying, ooh, we kind of blew it in Philadelphia. We were kind of dumb about this president-vice president thing. That was a really bad idea. So we're going to be smart this time. We're not going to just run one person for the presidency. We're going to run 2 people from our party. So if we're lucky, we'll get first and second place from our party, and we'll get both the president and the vice president from the exact same party, all right? So both parties did this. And when they ended up counting all the votes, Jefferson had the most votes. Let me correct that. Jefferson tied for the most votes. The person he tied with was not John Adams. This is how unpopular John Adams had become. He finished in 3rd place. But the guy who finished tied with Jefferson, who was a Democrat Republican, was Aaron Burr. Okay? And so everyone had assumed during the election that Jefferson would be the president if you got he was kind of going to be the president, and they were hoping another Democrat Republican, Burr, would finish second, and he would become the vice president. But when they counted all the votes, tie. Now Burr could have said, well, of course, I'm going to step aside for the president. I'll just take the vice presidency. No, Aaron Burr said, I can be the president? So the vote actually goes to the House of Representatives, and Burr had a lot of friends in the House of Representatives. And I believe it took 36 rounds of voting before Jefferson finally beat Burr in the House of Representatives. We were this close to getting Aaron Burr as the president of the United States. This close. Jefferson may have never been the president. It might have been Aaron Burr. And in fact, again, if you know anything about his story or the popular musical Hamilton now and all that stuff, one of the reasons why Aaron Burr hated Alexander Hamilton was because Alexander Hamilton was a Federalist. And at the very end of that voting in the House of Representatives, he told his followers, I hate Jefferson, but Burr is dangerous. He's scary, dangerous. He finally threw his support to Jefferson. Jefferson becomes the president, and Burr has a grudge. On top of some other things, has a grudge. As you probably know, what's going to happen? So Aaron Burr becomes the vice president, and what does he do while he's the vice president?
He kills him.
Yeah. He becomes the first vice president to shoot somebody while in office. Dick Cheney will later tie that. But in this case, Aaron Burr's going to challenge Alexander, and again, he's vice president when he does this. He challenges Alexander Hamilton to a duel, which is illegal, and they go to New Jersey, and he shoots him to death in a duel. And a lot of people believe that in this duel, I mean, this was a story that came out at the time, and a lot of people believe this story, is that literally during the duel, Alexander Hamilton, they go there, they row across from Manhattan to New Jersey, they go over there with these seconds watching it, and Alexander Hamilton shoots up in the air, like, we prove we're both men, I'm not going to kill you, shoots in the air, and Aaron Burr takes aim, bam, and kills one of the great minds of our history, okay? So that's the guy who could have become the President of the United States, and these other things he did, which people, he was treasonous against the United States. He was this close to being the President of the United States, okay? So, anyway, I always feel sorry for Alexander Hamilton. Every time I go to Manhattan, I go to his grave. I go visit Alexander Hamilton's grave in the shadow of Wall Street. Okay, so anyway, back to the main story. Adams runs against Jefferson. Jefferson wins, and after this crazy mess, he's going to become the third president of the United States, okay? And Aaron Burr is going to be his vice president and going to kill Hamilton, okay? Now, all that is really is important to understand what's about to happen, okay? And then we're getting close to Marbury versus Madison, very close to Marbury versus Madison. Very importantly, when Thomas Jefferson wins, that election was held in November, just like today. That election's held in November. But, and then again, there's this craziness that happens in the House of Representatives. But guess when Thomas Jefferson becomes the President of the United States? When did Donald Trump, what month, or Barack Obama, what month did they become President of the United States? January, right? Inauguration's in January. Very importantly to this story is, back then, election was in November back then too, but inaugurations were in March. So the gap between election day and inauguration was longer. There's a longer period where the old people who had these jobs hang on to their jobs longer than in today's world, okay? So, Adams loses. And very importantly, not only does Adams lose, guess what happens to the Federalist Party in Congress? Crushed, okay? So the Federalists lose the White House, they lose the executive branch, again the popular one like this, they lose the executive branch, they lose the House of Representatives, they lose the Senate. So they find out on election day, America is mad at us, they don't like us anymore, and they get wiped out, trounced, like every election, in every phase of the election, every part of the election, Congress, House, Senate, and the presidency. So they're done, they've lost. And they could have just said, okay, America's mad at us, we lost, we'll be good losers, we'll leave. But what they did, they didn't say we're good losers, let's go home. They said, maybe getting back to their arrogance, I can't believe we lost. We're the better party, we're greater, we're smarter. This is a fluke. It must, it's like, I can't believe it happened. It's a joke, okay? And we're going to come back. And so because we're so sure we're going to come back, we're going to fight to hang on to power. Now, we know we lost this round of elections, but we're thinking in 2 years, 4 years, oh my gosh, we're the phoenix rising from the ashes. We'll come back. So we've lost for now, but when we believe in ourselves, we believe in our party. What can we do? What can we do to cling to power? Oh, I didn't do that. So I thought you would do that. That's me. Okay, sorry. Who's doing that? Stop. Okay, so it's me. All right. Stop doing it. Okay. All right. So to cling to power, they said to themselves, okay, we lost the White House for 4 years. We can't do anything about that. We lost the House for at least 2 years. We lost the Senate for at least 2 years. What can we do to hang on? And they said, okay, the only thing left are the courts, the judiciary. let's try to hang on to power in the courts. We can't do anything else about these other branches for now. We'll come back, but at least let's gain power, make sure we have power over the courts. So instead of going home in November and saying, we blew it, we're done, I've lost my job, they said, we lost power, but I'm still president till March. I'm still a member of the House of Representatives till March. I'm still a senator till March. So they went to work. They didn't leave Washington. They said, let's go to work. Okay? We're not going to be good losers. We're going to be bad losers. Okay? We're going to use the last moments of power to accomplish things. So what they started doing was they looked through every opening that existed at that moment, every judicial opening in that moment. They said, we're going to now nominate new judges, and we're going to confirm them and put them in power. We're not going to leave with any job openings. Every job opening will be filled. And we're not even going to be just satisfied with filling all the job openings. We're going to start creating new courts with new judgeships. Okay? We're going to expand the size of the judiciary. So during those final 4 months, they go to work filling judgeships that are empty or are unfilled at that moment. They create new courts, they create new judgeships, and Adams nominates these people, and the Congress confirms these people, the Senate confirms these people. So they're actually filling jobs while they're leaving office, okay? This is where the most important person in our story comes into the story. And that is John Adams, okay? That is John Adams. Now, John Adams comes into the story for, we'll see, for 2 different reasons. One reason is this. During this time, this lame duck 4 months or so, one of the jobs that was open was Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Okay? So the Chief Justice position was now vacant. So of course, Adams and the Federalists say, we got to fill that job, right? We're going to fill the job for Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The man who ends up with that job, the man who's nominated and confirmed that job, is John Adams. He is, thank you, John Marshall. Glad you're listening. It was a test. Okay, okay, good job. Okay, was John Marshall. John Marshall is going to become the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court during this lame duck session. Okay, but let me tell you again a little context, because again this is important to the big picture of the story. Let me go off a little tangent here, but for a reason. All these are for a reason. So you understand this. You understand again why this case is so important. Believe it or not, John Marshall wasn't the first choice. John Adams first approached John Jay. There's so many Johns in this story, okay? John Jay. And he asked John Jay, he said, Mr. Jay, will you be the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court? There's an opening. I want to nominate you, okay? Now, again, in today's world, if somebody came up to you and said, do you want to be the Supreme Court Chief Justice? Most people would say, when can I, where do I sign? Immediately, you just made my life. John Jay said, drop dead. Drop dead. Are you kidding me? Are you insulting me? No way on earth do I want that job. He turns him down flat. Now you might say, is that John Jay some idiot, some crazy guy? Turns down the job to be the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court? No, John Jay was not a dummy. He was brilliant. He knew from whence he spoke. John Jay knew all about this job because he had already had this job. John Jay is, in fact, a little piece of history, the first Chief Justice in history of the United States Supreme Court. He's the guy George Washington first chose for the job. He's the first person, the first man to ever hold this job. He holds the job. It's so miserable, and I'll tell you why in a minute. He quits, and now Adams is begging him years later, give it another chance. Come back to the job. Come back. He's saying, Been there, done that, terrible, you know, I'm too smart to do it. You fooled me once, you're not going to fool me twice. Now you might say, how could that be a bad job? It was a bad job for a really smart, talented person. I mean, there'd be some people rather have that job than, you know, be a blacksmith or something, or some terrible job, you know, in the fields or something. John Jay was a super smart guy who knew he could do just about anything. And this job, this is what this job used to be like. The United States Supreme Court, when it started, in these early days, they did not have a building or place to work. There was no Supreme Court building. They would meet any place they could find to rent a place for a day or two. They met in local courthouses, they met in hotel lobbies, they met in warehouses, they met any place they could find a job. And part of their job was, people didn't all come to Washington to see them. They would ride circuit. They would travel around the country and go to Philadelphia, go to Boston, go to Richmond. And they would have to travel on the roads and the weather of those days, stagecoaches, chance of being robbed, freezing cold, bumpy roads, and go to a city for a couple days, meet sometimes in saloons. They met in saloons. Decide cases in saloons, get no respect, leave town. They're like a traveling circus, okay? And go on to someplace else. And let me tell you, really, it's a shocking kind of, in many ways. They did not decide almost any cases of any importance at all. They were deciding unimportant cases and miserable conditions, showed no respect, not worthy of their own building. And John Jay said, I traveled that circuit. Terrible life. I'd rather be governor of New York, okay? I'd rather be something like that. And he says, drop dead. And again, John Jay is this really smart guy. I mean, in fact, again, just to show you some proof of how smart he was, he is one of the 3 authors of the Federalist Papers. Who are the 3 authors of the Federalist Papers? Madison, Hamilton, poor sad Hamilton, and John Jay. They're the 3 authors of those papers. And he was a great diplomat. So anyway, the point is, and again, this is actually important to the story, John Jay says, nope, take your job and shove it. I don't want it. A terrible job. I'll get a better job. Okay? And I guarantee that when he did get better jobs, he said, I made a great courageous choice. It was a great decision I made. Okay? Adamson turns to Marshall. And every indication is Marshall did not want this job either. He only did it because he was a very loyal Federalist. And he was very loyal to John Adams. So he did it as a favor to John Adams, okay? So Marshall says yes. And Marshall is going to be confirmed during those 4 months, and he's going to become the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. But, again, related to the story here, when he becomes the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, when he becomes the Chief Justice, he already has another job. He is the Secretary of State. He's Rex Tillerson, okay? He is the Secretary of State. And again, it's hard to imagine today's world. He already has this job, so that's why back to his relationship with Adams. Adams had made him Secretary of State. He's Secretary of State, and then one day Adams says, oh, and by the way, can I give you another job? Chief Justice, Supreme Court? Okay, I'll do that, okay. And when he takes the second job, he doesn't leave the first job. He has both jobs. He's actually Secretary of State and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court simultaneously. Okay? Something that would never happen today. Yes?
Did he get paid more?
Yeah, he got paid more. For the 4 months, he got paid more, okay? But again, in today's world, you would say, what? We need 2 people for these big, big jobs, right? But they said, no, you can do it. You can do it. Now, the reasons why it's interesting historically, it's going to have an impact on the story. It's a major impact on Marbury versus Madison. Okay? So, John Marshall says yes as a good, loyal Federalist. He says yes. He starts doing these 2 jobs. But he's trying to, he's running back and forth, trying to do both jobs. And I always find this amazing. And unbelievably, again, in the modern world, Secretary of State, back in Marshall's day, meant secretary. He was like the president's secretary, okay? not just like fancy, there's a title, you're secretary, you're not really a secretary. He was really a secretary. And part of being Secretary of State, for some crazy reason, meant this. All of these men and women, oh, not women, sorry, there were no women being chosen back then. All of the men being chosen, so these are the final 4 months, these crazy 4 months. It's lame duck bugs. Adams keeps nominating new people. Congress keeps confirming these new people, these new men. And as they're doing this, you have to officially fill out the work about this, the paperwork about this. Every commission and all the details of the commission had to be written out by the Secretary of State, okay? And so Marshall is trying to keep up with all the paperwork, all right? And I'll talk about this paperwork in a second, what that means, paperwork back in 1801. And so literally, not surprisingly, he's trying to keep his head above water, but he's not really keeping up. The last day, John Adams is the President of the United States. The last day John Marshall is Secretary of State, Marshall still has paperwork to do, okay? And I guess, again, I think Marshall's smart, and he's smart enough to kind of like plan this out. He had the last day 17 more papers to fill out, okay? And he was smart enough to leave the last 17 that he left were like the least important, okay? But he goes into his office the last night he has the job, and he has to make sure everything is filled out. And by being filled out, again, this is not word processing. This means he is dipping a quill pen into ink and writing on paper, and you can't make a mistake, right? On November the 30th, 1800, President John Adams of the United States nominated John Wainwright for the position of judge on the 3rd District Court of Washington, D.C., and going to whatever Congress for a vote. The vote in the Senate was, and running all these things out. And if he makes one mistake, on the March 3rd, November 30th, and he also needed, and he had to run around and do this too. He had, and I think he asked probably Adams that morning to like pre-sign. He needed the signatures of key people on these documents. Okay, so literally he goes to his office the final night. He has 17 to complete, and guess what? The story goes, it took him all night. It took him all night. He pulled it all nighter. But by the middle of the night, whatever exact time it was, no one knows for sure, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, which probably technically it wasn't his job anymore, but by the middle of the night, he had written, completed, signed all 17 commissions, all 17 appointment papers. So he does that, he closes them up, and then he has something called the Great Seal of the United States. And he puts that seal, making an official document. And in fact, kind of unbelievably, that seal that he used that night, Rex Tillerson has on his desk today. That seal has been passed on all these years, okay? That still exists, the Great Seal of the United States. It's like the official sign, the United States approves of this thing, okay? Stamps, okay? 17 papers, 17 letters to say you have gotten this job. The government, this is the official document saying you have become a judge. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. So he says, okay, I'm done, yay, I made it, I pulled this off, yay. Last second, but I did it. But it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I can't go, I'm not going to go deliver these, and we can't deliver them at 3 o'clock in the morning. So what does he do? Nice pile? No. Please have these delivered tomorrow morning. And he goes off into the night. The next morning, in comes Thomas Jefferson, the new President of the United States, and James Madison, who's going to become the Secretary of State. So the Secretary of State goes to his desk, finds what? 17 appointment papers with a note. Have these delivered, please. The Secretary of State goes and tells Mr. Jefferson, I found this on my desk. What would you like me to do, Mr. President? And Thomas Jefferson says, if you think for 1 second we're going to give those dirty, rotten scoundrels, the Federalists, any more jobs, you don't know how I think. Instead of being good losers, accepting the results of the election, they lost their jobs, they created new jobs for themselves. It's disgusting what they've been doing for 4 months, and we are not going to be complicit or part of this in any way. Take those papers and throw them in the garbage. None of those men are ever going to be a judge under my administration. Throw them in the garbage. And so, those 17 appointment papers were disposed of with the morning waste, okay? Gone, okay? Gone. Now, that should be the end of the story, okay? It would be an interesting story, but that should be the end of the story. It's really the background to the beginning of the story, okay? Because, at least to the legal case, all that leads to this moment. And at this moment in history, what's going to happen and why this is going to be connected to the United States Supreme Court is one of those 17 men, one of those men who did not receive his papers the next morning was a guy named William Marbury. William Marbury. And when William Marbury did not receive his appointment papers, he, instead of accepting just, this is politics, I guess, I ran out, we just got bad luck and ran out of time, it's unfortunate. William Marbury didn't just take it on the chin and just say, oh, I just got unlucky. He said, I want my job. I want my job. And I'm willing to go to court to get my job. All right? I'm willing to fight for my job. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get my job. Now, unbelievably to me is this. I started out with saying this. This is the greatest, the most important case in the history of the world. Okay? But what the greatest, most important case in the history of the world is about is a guy who wants his job. That's all it's about. A guy who wants his job. And the job isn't even a great job. His job was the lowest judge possible, the lowest of all judges. The job he had not received the papers for was to be a justice of the peace in the District of Columbia. A JP in the District of Columbia. And what JPs, justice of the peace, do even in today's world, is they tend to marry people, and in today's world they give out speeding tickets, okay? And so he had lost a job to marry people, and if you rode your horse too fast to Washington, you'd get a ticket or something, okay? That was his level of power, okay? But you must, there's Washington, D.C., the great Washington, D.C., okay? Well, let me just also mention this. This is not Washington, D.C., 2018. This is Washington, D.C., 1801. You know what Washington, D.C. was like then? It was a swamp. It was a swamp.
Disgusting.
It was literally a swamp. That literally, these neighboring states, Maryland, Virginia, gave up this free land, and it was a land nobody lived in because it was full of swamps, malaria, disease, mosquitoes everywhere, and there was no city, no town. So literally the town was just being built, and in fact, again, it says, there's so many stories about Congress. Congress would meet the second Congress was over, they rushed out of town. There were no restaurants, there was nothing to do, there was no place to nothing nice to do there, so no one wanted to really live there, not initially, okay? So in this little tiny village at this point, he was going to be the justice of the peace, okay? So that very, very, very unimportant job leads to the greatest case of all time, okay? Leads to the greatest case of all time. So, William Marbury goes to court to get his job. Now, all these, all these factors are, I think oftentimes this is taught and you just assume all these things away. But every one of these things is shocking. William Marbury goes to court, and the court he goes to is the United States Supreme Court. He starts at the United States Supreme Court. Okay? That should, in theory, ring off bells. What? Why do you start there? I'll tell you in a second why. But this case is only heard by one court ever. It's only heard by the United States Supreme Court. No lower level courts, it goes to the top of the food chain, okay? Immediately. Now how can this case go to the top of the food chain? Well, William Marbury's lawyer knew about a law. The law is called the Judiciary Act of 1789. The Judiciary Act of 1789. And in this law, let me just tell you a tiny bit about this law, just so you have some appreciation. This law is a big law, filled with important details, an omnibus piece of legislation. It's a really big, lengthy piece of legislation. And in fact, I would argue it's a law by Congress, signed by the President. This law, it's a federal law, is the most important law ever in history, even to this day, ever about the federal courts. Okay? This is a really important law. In many ways, it creates the federal courts, lower federal courts. It's a really, really important law. Well, in this really important law, there was a sentence. The sentence, I'm guessing, getting back to, you probably know in about 2 seconds about this or worried about this. They thought it was a minor little point of the law. But this little sentence said this: the U.S. Supreme Court can issue, and they didn't go off the paper, but I'm going to go off the paper. The U.S. Supreme Court can issue, and here's a key term in a second, writs of mandamus. The U.S. Supreme Court can issue writs of mandamus. Mandamus, okay. I have a cold, I'm not all those drugs, oh sorry, I apologize, okay. But I'm just thinking, I'm so lucky I get to do this. I can't believe they're paying me. Okay, sorry, right. Writs of mandamus. All this drug medication, okay. All right. Did I do it wrong again? Mandamus. Okay, writs of mandamus. U.S. Supreme Court can issue writs of mandamus. Okay. I'm a lucky man. Okay, so here we go. So, all right. So, you might be saying to yourself, what's a writ of mandamus? Here's the technical definition. A writ of mandamus is an order to someone to do their job or do their duty. D-U-T-Y. Do your job or do your duty. Okay? Do your job or do your duty. And not just technically. Often I will just say, and that you don't need to know this, it's usually an order to a government official to do their job or do their duty. But it's an order to someone to do their job or do their duty. Okay? So it's an order a court can issue that says, if they issue a mandamus, it's an order to give to somebody, do your job, do your duties. Okay? So, William Marbury's lawyer knew that existed for some reason. I don't know how he knew it, but he knew it. Okay? And he said, the U.S. Supreme Court has the power to give out those orders. Well, he says, oh, okay, this can work for us. We can go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we can ask them for a writ of mandamus. And so if they say, yes, here's a writ of mandamus, well, guess what we're going to sue? James Madison, Secretary of State, and we're going to say, they give us this piece of paper, Mr. Madison, Secretary of State, writ of mandamus, do your job, do your duty, which is, Secretary of State, give me my papers. Your job is to fill out those papers. I want you to fill out my papers to say, I am going to be the Justice of the Peace for the District of Columbia. Fill out the paperwork that I never got. It's your job to do that. You're being ordered by a court to do that. Give me my papers so I can become that judge. All right? Now, I'm sure, in addition to just thinking, oh, we can save all this time. We'll go right to this, go right to the top. What else is working here? What else is going on here? Okay, it's this. Who is sitting on the United States Supreme Court?
John Marshall.
John Marshall is the Chief Justice, and every member of the Supreme Court is a Federalist. All Federalist judges. Everyone a Federalist. So you're this lawyer, and you think, you're Marbury, boy, we can get right to the final answer. And who's sitting there? All these nice, good Federalists. Okay? This is a slam dunk. This is so easy, it's scary. Now, I need to add and mention this to you. So they do. They appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, we'll hear the case. Sitting there again is John Marshall. Now, under judicial ethics, John Marshall was seeing a case that this case came before him. An obvious question was, should he hear this case? And the answer is, should he excuse himself, or technical legal word, recuse himself from this case? And the answer is, this is not a hard one to think about. He should have recused himself. He should have said, I can't hear this case. Why? Because you recuse yourself from a case when there's an obvious bias. He is so obviously biased in this case, or has a connection to this case which is inappropriate, not just because he's a Federalist. He is the star witness of the case, right? In other words, what this case would be about is you go into court and Mr. Marbury, were you appointed to be Justice of the Peace for District of Columbia? Yes, sir, I was. Okay, and who was supposed to fill out and did you receive the papers? No, sir, I did not. And who was supposed to give you the papers? You were, sir. Okay, so why didn't you give it to me? Well, I was really busy that night. I was running real fast, and I didn't get done to it. So now the star witness of the case, the reason, in fact, this way, not just star witness, the reason there is a case is because John Marshall didn't do his job fast enough. In other words, if John Marshall had done this one day earlier, William Marbury is the Justice of the Peace for the District of Columbia. So the whole case exists because he didn't do his job fast enough. The whole story is about him, basically, and so 90% of the story about why there's a case is about him. So think about it again, just put yourself in this situation. In today's world, what judge would hear a case where the judge was a witness to the case? Like, again, there's a murder case. Yes, I'm the one who found the dead body, and and it was very bloody, and I saw you run away from the scene of the crime. I mean, a judge can't hear a case where he's the witness, where he has to testify. So John Marshall should have said, no, I can't hear this. My other fellows will help you out. They'll do it. Don't worry about it. But of course, I can't hear the case. John Marshall's reaction is this: I'm not going anywhere. I am going to hear this case. And in fact, John Marshall is going to write the opinion for the Supreme Court. He takes the lead in the case that he should not hear. He becomes the star of the opinion, okay? So he's not walking away from this. He says, no way, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving, all right? I'm going to bring this to a conclusion. So you're William Marbury. You're his lawyer, and John Marshall says, I'm not going anywhere. You have to say, this is so sweet. This is so wonderful. I can't wait. We've already won. This case is not even fair. Of course they're going to vote for us. They're going to give a Federalist judge. They hate Thomas Jefferson. They're going to embarrass Thomas Jefferson. Oh my gosh, this is perfect. The case is over. This is done. Now, if you had never heard this case in your life before, and the only thing you ever heard about was what I told you today, and I asked you next, okay, so here's the setup of this whole case. Who's going to win this case? The answer is, of course, Marbury, right? This is, I guess, rigged. It's rigged, not fair. It's rigged. This isn't justice, it's just rigged, okay? And that makes perfect sense, except for this. Marbury's going to lose. What? How can he lose? It's rigged. He's going to lose. Because there's something here, which again, is part of the big story outside, or hanging all over this thing, or hanging around this case, circling it, is the power of the Supreme Court. It had none. So, when this case was accepted, when this case was going to be heard by the Supreme Court, Thomas Jefferson started talking to the newspapers again. And he says, this is a disgrace. Marshall's a disgrace. He didn't recuse himself. But guess what? I don't care. Because when that court, which we know it's rigged, they're going to issue that writ of mandamus. He says, I can't wait for that day. Because they're going to bring up that writ of mandamus, and they're going to bring it to my office, or they're going to bring it to James Madison's office, and he said like, it's going to be the most fun day we're going to ever have. They're just going to make our day. They're going to give us that piece of paper, and you know what we're going to do? Rip it up and laugh at them. And say, oh, you're ordering us to do this? Let's see you make us do anything. Because we're not going to give him that job. So they can give us that piece of paper. That paper doesn't scare us at all. Now, let me put this into context again, or if you understand. You must say, "What court? They have to listen to a court. It's a court order. It's the Supreme Court. Of course, you have to listen." Okay. Let me give you a little general information in case you've never heard this before. Okay. A lot of Americans are taught incorrectly. But that's simple. Incorrectly. If you were taught this in your 2311 or 12 class or high school, I'm sorry, because it's wrong, and I'm going to tell you the truth, okay? If you were taught that the Constitution created 3 equal branches of government, you were misled, okay? Probably not. It wasn't sinister. It was just they didn't know any better. You were misled. The United States Constitution, which you're going to become experts this semester on, did not create 3 equal branches of government. It created 3 branches of government, not equal. They were never equal. They were never intended to be equal. Nobody in Philadelphia said they were going to be equal. We have just kind of said, that seems like a nice fair thing. And it became a myth that's been perpetuated for 250 years. They never said the branches were equal. And in fact, I'm telling you, they never wanted them to be equal. They never thought they even made sense to be equal. I will tell you, in fact, exactly what they wanted, okay? In very simplistic terms. This is the order of power intended by the Founding Fathers. The most important branch, the branch that was supposed to have the most power, not equal, the most power for sure, was the Congress. That is what the Founding Fathers wanted. They wanted Congress to be the most powerful branch. Okay? Now again, no, it's all equal. What do you base that on? History, okay? Facts, okay? Real quickly, again, 2-minute version of this. These men, this country, had fought a war against England, against Great Britain. They had fought a war against a king, okay? Against a king who they claimed was a dictator. They did not want another king. They wanted a parliament, a Congress, a legislature to be the most powerful branch. And in fact, as some more very stark evidence of this, as you probably learned in your life, when we first became a country, our first constitution was not the constitution we're going to study this semester. Our first constitution was called the Arlington Confederation. We lived under it for 7 years. That first constitution, the very first one that was created by these men who had just fought the revolution, had how many branches of government? 1. Unbelievably, 1. They said, well, we won, yay, we got rid of the dictator. Let's form a government. You know what? The government is going to be a Congress, a legislature. Done. No president. George Washington wasn't president under the Articles of Confederation. Nope. He's under the newer Constitution, the one we're living under. No courts. None. No Supreme Court. None. Now, for 7 years, they live under that, and it's a mess. They said, well, I guess we found out that's the great branch, but I guess it'd be good to have somebody execute the laws. And maybe once in a while someone's going to sue each other, or someone will get arrested for a crime. I guess we need some courts. Okay? It was Congress. And they only later said, I guess we need a president, an executive. Okay? But let me tell you, in fact, tonight, which I'm sure you're going to start doing every night now, when you read the Constitution tonight, okay, Article 1 of the Constitution is about Congress. And look at how long it is. It's long. Article 2 is about the president, half as long. Because he has like half the powers. Okay? That's what they intended, like half the powers. Not even close. Article 3 is about the Supreme Court, the judiciary, okay? And I always tell my students, when I write this, this is on top and this is second. More accurately, like, in terms of like, if I was doing this like as a graph or something, Congress would be up here, the president would be like here, and the Supreme Court would be in the sub-basement of this building, okay? In other words, the gap between 1 and 2 is this. The gap between 2 and 3 is insane. It's just insane. Because, again, this is all about Marbury versus Madison. They didn't even, again, under the Articles, we don't even need courts. The states will handle all that stuff. And then when they got to this, they said, I guess it would be good to have federal, national courts, because we are going to write laws, and you can be punished under laws and all that stuff. But in their mindset, nowhere in the world were courts powerful. Courts were not political branches. They were not powerful. And so again, tonight when you're reading this Constitution, not only is Article 3 the shortest, it's a couple of paragraphs because they have nothing to say. They had nothing to say about it because who cared about that? It's just, yeah, we'll have one, okay, yeah, in fact, we're just going to see, back to this law, it says there'll be a Supreme Court and other courts if Congress wants to make them. Because they didn't even think about it, they didn't even care. They weren't even sure they would need 2 courts. If like later they decide to need a second court or third court, we can add them later, who cares? They're not important. So, back to the story, Thomas Jefferson is told this last place finisher is going to, now he's not first place, but he's at least got second. The third place team is going to come and tell him what to do. And he says, you guys are a joke. You have no power. You have, and you guys are a bunch of unelected midnight judges. He called Marshall a malignant. He said this malignant is going to tell me what to do. And incidentally, Marshall was his cousin. Okay? Jefferson and Marshall were cousins. He said, if you think you unelected judges are going to tell a man who was elected by the people, a man who's the commander-in-chief of the military, what I'm going to do, let's see you enforce that. Because I have the army, you've got what? You don't even have a building. You don't have a police officer who works for you. You're going to tell me what to do? He says, we're going to rip it up and laugh at you. So John Marshall knows it. He hears about this, right? Reads the story. And he knows, guess what? Jefferson's right. If they go eyeball to eyeball, this is a fight, a fist fight. He's going to get knocked down, get up, knocked down again, get up, get up. I mean, he can't fight him. He doesn't have any weapons. Article 3 created nothing for him. He's got nothing to use to force his will. So the Supreme Court at this moment is a total joke. And he says, with this case, it'll prove we're a total joke. It'll prove he's right. We are not an equal branch. We are the joke of the branches. All right? And in fact, back to this equal branches, I love this little fact of the case. Election of 1800. Election of 1800. 1801, Marbury doesn't get his job. He's upset. He goes to court. And he goes straight to the United States Supreme Court. 1801. Decision's 1803. Huh? Why is this not an 1801 decision? Why is this not an 1802 decision? These guys were not busy, let me tell you. Well, they had so many cases back then. They had very few cases. Why is it not 1802? Why is it 1803? Because when they accepted the case, back to Jefferson laughing at them, he was mocking them. He said, guess what? Oh, they're so scary. Oh, they're going to come at me. Oh, yeah, we'll see. He told Congress, let's shut down the Supreme Court. And he did. They shut down for more than a year. Congress gave him no money to operate. He said, we're not going to pay you. Bye. And they all went home. The third equal branch was told by the other branches to go home, and they did. And they did. Now again, in today's world, that's insane. But the reason that's insane is because of this case. He was told, go home, and he did. Embarrassing, mocked, shamed by his cousin. But guess what? He's going to get revenge, okay? And Jefferson probably made one of the biggest mistakes of his life. Had they just heard the case immediately, and he would have ripped it up, he wins. But when he sends John Marshall home, he gives John Marshall a year to think about this. He gives him a year to plan this. To plan a sneak attack. And so when they hear this case in 1803, Thomas Jefferson and the rest of the American government is going to be stunned by what they hear. Marshall knows if I do the obvious thing, I lose. I get crushed by Jefferson. But I'm going to hit him with something he does not see is coming. He's about to get mugged and he doesn't know it. Okay? And what he's going to write is this opinion is utter political genius. This is one of the most brilliant moves in the history of the United States, maybe the most brilliant political move ever, okay, in the United States history or just about anywhere. He is going to win this war without weapons against an opponent who's stronger and has weapons. His opinion is genius, genius. And I say that not because by saying political genius, I'm not saying necessarily it's moral, good, ethical. I'm saying he outsmarts somebody with nothing on his side but his wit, and his brilliance, and his smarts, okay? His own intellect. So, next time, I'm going to try to keep you awake all weekend, because I know you'll be thinking about nothing else, okay? On Tuesday, we're going to tell you what he does in 1803. And it probably won't take the whole hour. We have probably another, at least, we might have like 45 more minutes. I might start then chapter 1 after that, but on Tuesday, I'll tell you the end of the story. And we'll probably start the next chapter, chapter 1, which again is history, the very beginning of this class, a little bit of history. So please read chapter 1. We're going to start talking about the Bill of Rights soon. And then maybe next Thursday, we'll definitely be talking about the Bill of Rights. And then, again, you don't have to bring your book yet. But when we get to chapter 2, you have to start bringing your book every time, okay? Have a great weekend. See you then. See you on Tuesday.